Hello and welcome back. This is Spider-Man. We are in the negative suit, and I will be talking about a rather interesting concept here. So first off, I'm going to describe an episode of Doctor Who. It's from about 10 years ago. Featured the 11th Doctor and was titled Amy's Choice. Now, in it, the villain of this particular piece trapped the Doctors and his companions, and they keep jumping back and forth between two realities. And the entire option, or the entire, impetus plot involves the Doctor and his companions choosing which of the two realities is actually real, is the real reality. So at the end, pretty much by default, they chose one of the realities, and the villain says, okay, yes, you've chosen reality, and kind of just vanishes. At which point the Doctor thinks about it for a minute and then destroys the TARDIS and kills everybody inside of it. And they wake up in the TARDIS and the Doctor kind of explains that, both choices were not reality. That the entire trick of it that he was trying to pull was tried to make them pick between these two different realities. None of them were actually real. That real reality was a third option that they weren't given by the villain. So why am I telling you about this while I'm in Spider-Man? Well, because it's a really good illustration of a concept which has a few different names, but can be called the trap of two different ideas. Basically, that's when you're presented with options, but only two options. And it's a trick that con artists and politicians often use. In fact, if you watch a lot of politicians around, you'll see them using this trick an awful lot. A good example of this in politics nowadays would be how Donald Trump and his supporters are often portrayed. So the idea is essentially this: either you hate Donald Trump or you're an ignorant racist. And of course nobody wants to be an ignorant racist, so of course they go like, well, I don't like Trump anyway. Ugh. And leave it at that. Now, the thing about these choices is that they are actually quite easy for people to fall into this trap. And the reason being is that we as human beings, as regular people, tend to take the path of least possible resistance. Now, with my example involving Trump, it's really hard if you didn't support Trump, and this is actually true of any politician, but it seems to be more defined with Trump for whatever reason. But if you don't support Trump, it's very hard to understand why anybody would support Trump. And so the simple, and instead of like looking into motives, into doing that, it's much easier to just kind of, have a simple solution, a simple answer to it, like, oh, they must be all ignorant racists. That's a simple answer, and it's a lot easier than trying to explore the, quite frankly, complex motivations behind a person's decision on who to vote for, on politicians and so on. And like I said, this is true of all politicians. When you cast a vote for anyone, for any election, it's usually not just, one, you usually don't have one reason for voting for them. You usually have quite a few different reasons depending upon your own political views, their positions on different political ideas and concepts, and really what you think ultimately will be more beneficial to you. That's how human beings make pretty much all decisions. Oh, I can't believe I hit that. Anyway. We all make decisions by kind of weighing up the different options and making the decisions. But that takes time, and that is difficult. So, oftentimes, we will shortcut it and just go with what somebody else says we should go with. Now, if the person you trust to make this decision for you or to help you make this decision is a good, trustworthy person who not only has your your interests in mind, but also the interests, their own interest. Okay, hold on. Sorry, J. Jonah is just so distracting. Right, we'll get rid of him for a second. Well, problem is I'm talking right now. But yeah, let's actually... J. Jonah here. J. Jonah is pretty much... He thinks on multiple levels. He's a complex character, like all good, well-developed, well-written characters are. But when it comes to Spider-Man, it's pretty much black and white with Spider-Man. Spider-Man is bad, so anything J. Jonah does to oppose Spider-Man is absolutely right in his eyes. And if you've read the comics, especially, well, I read mostly the classic ones, but his choice to go to, you know, oppose Spider-Man, not believe that he ever does anything good, has led to some very serious consequences. The creation of Scorpion in the comic books was entirely on J. Jonah Jameson. He paid for the experiment. He kind of, you know, pressured the scientists who had some ethical doubts about doing it to do it, and the end result was that the process made Matt Gargan, you know, it drove him nuts. He lost his moral, basically his entire moral center was lost because of the experiment and the effects of the chemicals on his body, and he became the supervillain Scorpion. And yeah, that is entirely on J. Jonah Jameson, and pretty much everything Scorpion has done since then is, you know, a result of that. So we can see... I'm gonna swing around here because I don't want to chase another pigeon. Ugh.
Something's going down at the
so we can see
site. Gotta remember to check
that,
it out.
you know, sometimes if we're trapped in this idea of there are real... there can be, at least... Yes, there can be real consequences to when we become trapped in this idea of yeah, the trap of two ideas, I should say. And, you know, what do we do with it? You know, how... Well, first off, how do we avoid being in the trap? So first off, one of the first rules that I think everyone should learn is this. If something seems too easy, it is. And that's true of everything. If something is just too perfect for you, odds are you're falling into this trap. In one way or another, con artists will often, you know, use this idea of, or the trap of two ideas to con people out of their money. Quite easy to do. Politicians will do it to make really fairly complex political issues into a simple black or white equation that makes them look good and their opponents look bad. Even if it's, you know, it's generally much more complex than that is. So you avoid it by, you know, well, I think it was Einstein who said, never stop questioning. Always ask questions. You know, if somebody tells you this is 100% this all the time, it's either this or this, then, you know, say, wait a second. You know, start ask questions. Say, like, wait, that doesn't sound right. Right, let's ask questions, and you might find that the issue itself is much more complex than at first you thought it might be. Now, it is like I said, it's kind of an interesting thing. Now, oftentimes, and this goes back into why we fall into this trap, is that oftentimes to really make an informed decision on something, we need to have a lot of knowledge about that something, which requires a lot of research, a lot of effort on our part. And, you know, as I said before, we as human beings tend to fall into that situation of the path of least resistance. It's really hard to do a lot of research on something. Sometimes we just don't have time. And that's true and fine. But, you know, like I said, if it kind of goes back to I'm going to go back to the metaphor of the politicians with Trump. oftentimes, like I said, people have a wide variety of reasons for voting for Trump. But it's really hard to understand them unless you get to know these people, get to know, why they think the way they do, why, they felt Trump would be best. It requires a lot of effort and time on our part to really understand their viewpoints. And, oftentimes, it's a lot of effort. We have our own lives to live. And it's hard to do. It's hard to, create that empathy. Instead, it's easier, somebody offers us an easier solution. Oh, they must be ignorant and racist. And suddenly, oh, okay, that explains everything, and we can go about our business. And this is a trap that even really, really intelligent people can fall into. There are plenty of people that I've met who very, very seriously believe that the 60 million people or so in America that voted for Trump, every single one of them is an unrepentant racist. And, these are not stupid people who believe that, but they've fallen into that simple trap of lazy thinking. It's the trap of two ideas, that it's either A or B. And we don't see the complexities, the shades of gray that occur.
Now,
I thought I turned that off. Didn't I turn that off? So,
hard on Spider-Man.
Okay, wait, let me check. See, games, right? Let's see. See? Nope, that's subtitle. So, I must have turned subtitles off. Okay, see that there's a perfect situation. I thought this was a black and white situation. I'd gone in and turned it off, so it must be completely off or completely on. Turns out I had read the wrong thing and turned off the subtitles. So that, like I said, it was a much more complex issue than I thought it was. Because I made a silly mistake, which could happen to anyone. Now, we look at, for example, in this game, Mr. Negative is, a good example of this. He's not the best in comics, but he's a fairly good example. Because they represent there's Lee, who is his positive side, the best of him. Then there's Mr. Negative, who is the worst of him, the bad side of him. And he can kind of bring out all those negative emotions in people and make them feel that way. But you know who Mr. Negative reminds me of in comics? This might seem like a slight departure from what we're talking about, but I will bring it back, I promise. But Mr. Negative actually feels like a more modernized version of the Purple Man who appeared in Daredevil comics. If you'd watched the Netflix show Jessica Jones, he was portrayed by David Tennant in that. He was the best thing in that show, frankly. And as Kilgrave, he wasn't known as the Purple Man. In the comics, he was known as the Purple Man because the accident that gave him his powers was a chemical that covered him and dyed his skin purple. So he first appeared in Daredevil #2 in 68, I believe. And it was actually really an interesting story because he had the power to basically control just about anybody. Daredevil himself was able to resist it, I think partially due to his own accident with unstable chemicals, was able to resist his influence, so Daredevil was pretty much the only one who could resist his influence. But, Daredevil went to stop him. He discovered an actually interesting fact that had happened in the comic, and it could have made for a much longer, much more complex comic. It's a little sad that it was only, just one comic run, and I kind of wish they could have done a long graphic novel for it, but, it was the 1960s. They had to get things out quick and do quick stories in that time period. But it was discovered when Daredevil came up against him was that he had not actually committed a crime. He had gone to the bank and asked them to turn over the money to him at the bank, and because of his powers of persuasion, they just immediately turned over the money. And that technically isn't illegal for him to have done that. And so Daredevil was faced with this really interesting problem, was that he was dealing with a supervillain who had to be stopped, but he hadn't committed a crime. And since Daredevil is a lawyer, you know, he respected that idea and concept more than I think a lot of other superheroes would have. And so Daredevil was put into kind of a really interesting philosophical quandary, because he ultimately had to trick Kilgrave into committing a crime, which goes against everything he should stand for as a lawyer, which he personally does. He was a very... Daredevil, at least in the 60s, was a very honest lawyer. I can't speak for all... I'm not familiar with all the time periods of Daredevil, so if he still is a very honest lawyer, I'm not disparaging him that honesty of being a lawyer. So anyway, the reason I bring up this story is because it is a perfect example of what I'm talking about, the trap of two ideas. And the reason it's a perfect example is it shows that there was more to this, that it's not a simple black and white case of, oh, he's a supervillain, let's catch him and arrest him. It was a case of, we have to trick a supervillain into committing a crime in order to get him off the streets, to stop him from, you know, doing his horrible things, which technically aren't illegal. And it's a moral and ethical quandary, and it's a wonderfully done storyline by Stan Lee. And it illustrates kind of that these things aren't as simple and straightforward as we would like to think they are. And, you know, it's oftentimes in real life, when we're faced with real problems and real issues, we can't just simply say, okay, this is this or this, you know, we can't simply look at it and say this is black and this is white, or this is right or this is wrong. It's not always that easy and simple. Now, the truth of the matter is, if we put forth the time and effort, like I spoke of before, we can, pretty much any issue can ultimately be boiled down to whether is this right or is this wrong, if we're discussing ethical issues, or is this one thing or another thing. It can be boiled down that way. But like I said, it requires effort. It takes time and effort for us to get to that point. And human beings don't... Wow. So am I in the thing or not? So human beings tend not to like to do that. That we don't like to put forth the effort. That's why we fall into the trap of thinking it's all just one thing or another thing. So that's kind of the video on it. Let me know what you think. Wait, where am I? I can't see me. Regardless, that's pretty darn good reflection. So, yes, don't fall into the trap. Always ask questions, and if something seems too easy, or if somebody tells you there's only two options, question it. And, yeah, that's the video. Like and subscribe if you like it. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you think of Spider-Man's negative suit, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.